Let's go back in time. Imagine a land where libraries held more books than the rest of Europe combined, where scientists, poets, and philosophers shaped the future of humanity, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side, building one of the most advanced civilizations in history. This was Al-Andalus, the Muslim kingdom of Spain. For nearly 800 years, it was a center of knowledge, power, and culture. But one day, it was gone. Vanished. What happened? Was it a slow decline, or did it all come crashing down suddenly? And most importantly, could Al-Andalus have survived? Stay with me as we uncover one of the greatest stories in history, the rise and fall of Muslim Spain. Let's set the scene. It's the year 711 AD. The Iberian Peninsula, what we now call Spain, is ruled by the Visigoths, a kingdom that has been crumbling from internal conflicts and weak leadership. And here enters a man who would change history forever, Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq ibn Ziyad is so important that Gibraltar, the famous rock at the entrance to the Mediterranean, is named after him. Gibraltar comes from the Arabic Jabal Tariq, Jabal Tariq, meaning the mountain of Tariq. Tariq arrives with just 12,000 soldiers, against an army nearly twice his size, led by King Roderick. Most generals would hesitate, but not Tariq. According to legend, after landing in Spain, he burns his own ships.
The sea is behind you, and the enemy is in front of you. There is no turning back.
And what happens? They win. Against all odds, the Muslim army defeats King Roderick in the Battle of Guadalete. By 718 AD, nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula is under Muslim control. A new era has begun. For the next 3 centuries, Al-Andalus became one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. While most of Europe was living in the Dark Ages, struggling with plagues and wars, Muslim Spain had streetlights, hospitals, and running water. The capital, Cordoba, became the largest city in Western Europe, with a library with over 400,000 books, at a time when most European kings couldn't even read. Public baths and paved streets, while Paris and London were covered in mud. World-class universities attracting scholars from all over. And let's talk about the geniuses of Al-Andalus. Averroes, Ibn Rushd, the philosopher whose ideas influenced both the Islamic world and the Renaissance in Europe. Al-Zahrawi, the father of modern surgery, whose medical texts were used for centuries in European universities. Ibn Firnas, who built one of the first flying machines, centuries before Leonardo da Vinci even thought about it. This was Al-Andalus at its peak. But history tells us, every golden age has an end. For centuries, Al-Andalus stood as a beacon of civilization, but cracks had begun to form. By the 11th century, the great Ummayad Caliphate of Cordoba had collapsed due to internal strife, power struggles, and betrayal. What was once one powerful empire was now divided into over 20 small rival kingdoms, known as the Taifas. Many of them were former governors, military leaders, and aristocrats who once served the great caliphate. When Cordoba fell, they seized power for themselves, declaring independence in their own regions. At first, this didn't seem like a disaster. In fact, some Taifa rulers were great patrons of science, literature, and the arts. Cities like Seville, Zaragoza, and Valencia flourished with beautiful palaces, poetry, and advanced science. But there was a problem. They were divided. Each Taifa king saw himself as superior, fighting to expand his own tiny kingdom instead of uniting against the real threat, the Christian North. And here's where things got worse. Instead of defending their lands, many Taifa rulers paid Christian kings for protection. Yes, you heard that right. They paid tribute to the very people who were planning to conquer them. One famous poet of the time, Ibn Hazm, wrote in frustration,
The rulers of Al-Andalus fight each other, while the enemy sharpens his sword. They buy peace with gold, while the cross marches closer to their doors.
Meanwhile, in the Christian north, the kingdoms of Castile, Leon, and Aragon were uniting. Their leaders saw an opportunity. The Muslims were too busy fighting each other to defend themselves. King Alfonso VI of Castile famously declared,
"We shall take back what is rightfully ours, one city at a time."
The Taifa kings had become rulers by accident, filling the void left by the fallen caliphate. But their selfish ambitions and refusal to unite were paving the way for their own destruction. And one by one, the Taifas began to fall. In 1085, King Alfonso VI of Castile marched into Toledo, one of the most important cities of Al-Andalus. Toledo wasn't just any city. It was a cultural and scientific hub, filled with centuries of Muslim scholarship. When it fell, it sent shockwaves through the Muslim world. For the first time, it felt like Al-Andalus might not be invincible. Desperate, the remaining Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus did something they would later regret. They called for help. The Almoravids in Morocco, led by Yusuf ibn Tashfin, crossed the sea and entered Spain. They were brutal, disciplined warriors, and in 1086 they delivered a crushing defeat to the Christians at the Battle of Sagrajas. When Yusuf landed in Spain, he looked around and scoffed.
The people of Al-Andalus have grown soft. Their kings live in luxury, while their enemies sharpen their swords.
For a while, it seemed like they had saved Al-Andalus. But here's where things went wrong. The Almoravids didn't leave. Instead, they took control of Al-Andalus themselves. They ruled harshly, forcing their strict version of Islam on the people. Many Andalusians, who had enjoyed a more tolerant and sophisticated society, hated them. The Christian kingdoms, meanwhile, were growing stronger and smarter. In 1212, an army of Christian kings, knights, and warriors from all over Europe united to fight the Muslims in one massive battle, Las Navas de Tolosa. This wasn't just a battle. It was a massacre. The Christian army annihilated the Almohads. This was the moment where the fate of Al-Andalus was sealed. From this point on, the Muslim kingdom was on the defensive, losing land bit by bit. By the late 13th century, only one Muslim kingdom remained, Granada. But even Granada's days were numbered. By the late 1400s, Al-Andalus had shrunk to just one last kingdom, Granada. Granada was ruled by the Nasrid dynasty, and its last king was Muhammad XII, better known as Boabdil. The Nasrid rulers of Granada had a secret weapon. They were experts in diplomacy. For over 250 years, they survived by making deals, switching alliances, and playing the Christian kingdoms against each other. But by 1492, that strategy had stopped working. The Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, had one goal: to finish the Reconquista and erase Islam from Spain forever. The siege of Granada lasted over 7 years. It was brutal. The people starved. Diseases spread. Supplies ran out. The Christian forces surrounded the city, cutting off every escape. Meanwhile, inside Granada, Boabdil faced betrayal. His own nobles turned against him, believing surrender was the only way to save the people. On January 2nd, 1492, Boabdil finally surrendered. When Boabdil left Granada, legend says he turned back to look at his lost city one last time and cried. Seeing this, his mother reportedly said,
"Weep like a woman for a kingdom you could not defend like a man."
and just like that, 800 years of Muslim rule in Spain ended. But this was only the beginning of something far worse. After the fall of Granada, Muslims were promised peace. Ferdinand and Isabella had agreed to let them live freely and practice their religion. But they lied. Soon after, the Spanish Inquisition began. Many Muslims converted to Christianity, hoping to stay in their homes. But they were always watched, suspected, and persecuted. If they were caught secretly practicing Islam, they were tortured and burned at the stake. By 1609, Spain ordered all remaining Muslims to leave. Hundreds of thousands of people were thrown out of the country, forced to flee to North Africa and the Ottoman Empire. Many died at sea. Others were robbed and killed by bandits. The once glorious civilization of Al-Andalus was erased from Spain. Mosques were turned into churches. Arabic books were burned. The very memory of Muslim Spain was wiped out. Al-Andalus is a lesson in unity, knowledge and power. But also a warning, because Al-Andalus didn't fall because of outside enemies. It fell because of division, internal conflict, and betrayal. Now here's my question for you. Could Al-Andalus have survived? What if the Muslims had stayed united? Let me know in the comments. If you love history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more stories from the past.